What is the ideal starting lineup for the Pittsburgh Pirates in 2023? I'm going to give you my answer today on Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to that Pirates podcast, everybody. My name is Ethan Smith, of course, the host of the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every single day. Today's episode, of course, is brought to you by FanDuel. We will talk about them a little bit later. But on today's episode, 2023 has officially begun. We have regular season baseball this month. Happy March 1st, everybody. We are just 29 days away from Pirates opening day against the Cincinnati Reds. But that got me thinking. We've seen some things already from spring training, a couple of small, minor things, but the starting lineup for this Pittsburgh Pirates team is something that I haven't really talked about that much. I've talked about the depth that this team has. I've talked about the prospects this team has. I've talked about the position battles all on my 2023 preview series, but I haven't really put a big onus on the starting lineup. So, what is my ideal starting lineup for this Pittsburgh Pirates team? Well, before we even get into this, I will say that most of what you have here is going to be based off of the statistical values of where these guys played the best for whatever team they were on last year. Like, obviously, Santana, Choi, and Hedges were not here last year, but the Pirates construct their lineups very differently than some teams, especially last year, because Derek Shelton was changing the lineup every other day, and lineups seemed to be constructed weeks in advance. I think that changes this year just because the Pirates have a lot more to work with this time around. And you're going to obviously not see this lineup every single day. In a perfect world, you would want to see this lineup every day, but injuries happen. Guys need rest, a bunch of other things that get into that. But I did want to give that disclaimer that this is very statistical driven, and this is also my thoughts. So after you watch this episode, go down in the comments, hit me up on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates to give your thoughts on it. And I really want to hear from you because there's a lot of questions surrounding how this lineup is going to be constructed this year. But let's get right into it. I have a lot of graphics for you guys today too. So if you're on YouTube, you're going to absolutely love this show. But here is the overview of what we have as the ideal starting lineup for this Pittsburgh Pirates team heading into 2023. This is 1 through 9. This is what I would like to see. You guys are also going to see this graphic a lot this year as I post the starting lineups every single day and probably use them in my post-game pods. So I decided to go Ke'Bryan Hayes number 1, Bryan Reynolds number 2, Oneil Cruz number 3, Carlos Santana in the cleanup spot at number 4 is the DH, Andrew McCutchen at number 5 in right field, G-Man Choi at number 6, Jack Suwinski at 7, Rodolfo Castro at 8, and Austin Hedges at 9. So take a look at that for a second. We're going to pull it up once I end the episode. That way you guys get the full overview. But now I'm going to jump into the reasons why I put each player there. And I can already tell you, I expect some scrutiny from this because Fangraphs would have it one way, Baseball Savant would have it another way. And this likely won't be the lineup that the Pirates decide to go with on opening day. The players will be there, but not the order is what I'm getting at. There's a lot of different questions that go around to this, but Ke'Bryan Hayes batting leadoff is something that we saw last year. We saw it a lot in 2021 as well after the wrist injury. We know Ke'Bryan Hayes has the power in his bat to tap into. He just has to tap into it. Now, the big argument I think that you would get from Ke'Bryan Hayes batting leadoff versus somebody else is the idea that Oneil Cruz would be more of the prototypical leadoff guy to what we see in Major League Baseball now, where you see the likes of Kyle Schwarber, Ronald Acuna Jr., those guys who are batting leadoff that are giving you an automatic home run threat right off the gate to start a game. Ke'Bryan Hayes can do that. We saw when I did his episode about the expected home runs in other ballparks, it was very high. He was hitting the ball to the warning track a lot last year. Can he tap in to his potential that he has with that power bat at the leadoff spot? And if you're on YouTube, you see the graphic here. I have notes on why I made these decisions. Ke'Bryan Hayes last year slash 227, 276, 313, and 589 when batting leadoff last season. What was very interesting, though, is then when you get to when he was leading off an inning. So that was when he was not, he could have been in that one spot, but also including spots where he was maybe batting third, fourth, fifth, whatever. He skyrockets when you include that to have a 324, 359, 432, 791 slash line when leading off an inning. So if you have him bat leadoff, take those numbers into consideration while also taking his batting leadoff numbers into consideration, and you can make a pretty good case to see a pretty decent slash line there. But second most walks that he had in the season last year at any spot in the lineup came from batting leadoff. And he also had a very good average with batting with no outs, with a 253 average with batting with no outs. So that was also a very good thing to see from Ke'Bryan Hayes. And also in the first inning of games, which obviously he would be a part of a lot, batting leadoff is starting the game leading off. He would be batting in the first inning quite often. He had a 705 OPS batting leadoff last year. So I know the argument for Oneil Cruz is there. It's a very good argument. I almost put him here, but I do think, and we'll get into this when we get into Oneil Cruz a little bit more, that he will benefit from runners on base and runners in scoring position. That's just something that I think Oneil Cruz would benefit more from than Ke'Bryan Hayes, because Ke'Bryan Hayes, albeit a very potentially good hitter, he works well batting leadoff, in my opinion, with nobody on base, because once he gets on base, that then sets up the best player on this Pittsburgh Pirates team in the lineup, Bryan Reynolds, which number 2 was his spot last year. I don't think that's going to change, even with the additions of Carlos Santana, G-Man Choi into the lineup, as well as Austin Hedges. I think he will stay in this spot. And as you see in the notes that I have on the screen here, he's the best pure hitter on this ball club. The number 2 slot also sets him up very well to get on base for the guys behind him, as you saw earlier with the likes of Oneil Cruz, Carlos Santana, and Andrew McCutchen following behind him. Bryan Reynolds will benefit those guys by being on base. And of course, you see his slash line here on the YouTube stuff. If you're on Spotify or any of the audio ones, I highly recommend YouTube here, because I have all of these graphics, and I will probably post them along with the episode. But a 278, 362, 488, 850 slash line with 25 home runs last season at the number 2 spot. Again, this was his spot where he batted the most. So most of his statistics are going to be very, very close to what his actual statistics were last year. But one of the interesting stats that I found on Baseball Reference in regards to Bryan Reynolds when I was doing this was that he has a 312 average with runners on first base. So if Ke'Bryan Hayes just gets on base, like a bloop single or just a regular ground ball single or something like that, Bryan Reynolds 3 times out of 10 is going to get a hit as well, which is then going to, again, set up that lineup behind Bryan Reynolds that is going to get him to score, get Hayes to score. And that's really what you want from your lineup, is you want your first 2 guys to get on base. Not only do you want your guys to get on base, but Bryan Reynolds could also clear the bases before Oneil Cruz even gets up the bat with this lineup formation, scoring Hayes, and then you're already up 2-0, and Oneil Cruz can swing for the fences if he really wants to extend a lead in the first inning. This is the kind of potential that this lineup could have, and this lineup construction could have. Also, we already know the bottom stuff here that I have on the graphic. He slots, it allows him to set up powerful trio who follows behind him, which we'll get into here shortly. And he is also the best pure hitter on this team. So putting him at number 2, he was here last year. It appears where he's most comfortable. I think he's going to take his strong second half from last year at the number 2 spot in the lineup, take it into this year, and really, really help and benefit the guys that are going to follow, with number 3, of course, being Oneil Cruz. Now, again, the argument is there for him to have that leadoff spot. But when I was looking through everything, when I was analyzing all of the spots that he could be, especially leadoff, because I think that's where the other spot would be outside of 3, maybe cleanup, He only had 8 appearances at the spot last season, and there's a lot of variables to that. He came up in his rookie season. The Pirates wanted to get as many at-bats for him as possible, so they put him leadoff. That was fine. He did fine in that spot. Look at his slash line with runners in scoring position, men on base, and 2 outs last season. So these are all 3 different slash lines, but I want to get into all 3 of them very quickly. 312, 354, 591, 945 with 2 outs last season. That is not counting runners in scoring position. That is not counting if the bases are empty. He just did that when there were 2 outs last season. That is very good. And batting third, let's say Hayes and Reynolds do not get on base. Those are very welcoming numbers to see from a guy at 3 who is usually supposed to be your best hitter on the team. But those are numbers that you could say, okay, Oneil Cruz can extend an inning for you, even if nobody's on base. And with the kind of speed that he has, especially with the bases being bigger this year, who really knows? I mean, he could extend an inning or even hit a home run with 2 outs in the first inning or whenever they need it, and you're playing with house money at that point. He's also a 299, 361, 622, and an over 1,000 OPS last year with runners in scoring position. That's obviously something he wouldn't get that often batting first in the lineup, so I do push him down here because I think Oneil Cruz benefits more from having runners in scoring position. It's just something that I think he would do better with. I think it makes him more comfortable. And even if he's not getting on base, if he's hitting fly balls out to the outfield, if he has runners in scoring position, you're moving those guys in to score runs, or you're moving that guy from second to third more likely than not. And then even with men on base, so a guy on first or wherever, he has a 278, 345, 609, 994 slash line from last season to work with. So I see the argument again with Oneil Cruz being the leadoff guy because he gives you that immediate speed, that immediate power, that immediate home run threat right off the bat. But I do think Oneil Cruz in the long run will benefit better with having Hayes and Reynolds in front of him to get on base and give him opportunities for RBIs, give him opportunities to move those guys over, give him opportunities for RBIs even when he's not getting hits or getting on base. I just think all of that stuff cycles into a very good 2023 for Oneil Cruz if he indeed does bat in this spot. Today's episode, by the way, is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, of course, is the best place to do all of your sports betting in the year 2023. And you can make every moment more at FanDuel.com/locked on. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and the playoffs are not too far behind it. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. Of course, you can also bet on the spread, the money line, and totals, and more exclusive bets like the 2x3 bet, which is 2 3-pointers in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. So, as we continue to move on here with the lineup construction for the Pittsburgh Pirates, we now move to 4 through 6, and then we'll do 7 through 9. And at the cleanup spot, as you saw earlier, I have Carlos Santana. Another spot where there's an argument to be had with, I'd say, 2 players. You can either put G-Man Choi in this spot, or you can put Carlos Santana in this spot. I opt with Carlos Santana, and you guys know I do have a little bit of a bias when it comes to switch hitters. This would give you 2 switch hitters in the first 4 at-bats against lefties or righties, which is something that I also think would help Oneil Cruz in that department as well. We remember last year, Carlos Santana was with Seattle. He had a 746 OPS batting in the 4th spot last year for the Mariners, 12 home runs and 53 RBIs with men on base, which is a very welcoming statistic for your cleanup guy, especially when you look at the guys that are ahead of him in Ke'Bryan Hayes, Brian Reynolds, and Oneil Cruz. He also had a 787 OPS with runners in scoring position last year. So obviously Santana, much like I want to think with Cruz, is much better when he has runners on base and runners in scoring position. Now, when I was talking about the argument that can be made for a guy like Carlos Santana, you're looking at the idea that he also batted sixth last year for the Mariners, where he had a 934 OPS. It's just very interesting to me because he has that undeniable power that should help score the likes of Oneil Cruz and Brian Reynolds, or even a Key Brian Hayes in some scenarios where he is batting fourth. Now, again, G-Man Choi would also work in this cleanup spot, and I would have no issue with it because then you're pushing Santana's power back even further behind Andrew McCutchen, while then setting up guys like Jack Suwinski, Rodolfo Castro, and maybe even an Austin Hedges. But I opt to have him four here, partially because of my bias for switch hitters, but I also think Santana might offer a little bit more with his bat than G-Man Choi will at this spot, so I opted to put him at the cleanup position. Number 5, of course, as you saw earlier, was Andrew McCutchen, who batted primarily in the cleanup spot last year for Milwaukee, partially because Milwaukee has Christian Yelich as their leadoff guy, as part of what I was mentioning earlier, with the leadoff spot changing a lot in today's baseball. You see, again, that a lot of teams opt to have that power right at the top of the lineup. So McCutchen slots into that cleanup role where he still has some power to work with. Now, he's not the same Andrew McCutchen that we're accustomed to. He's not going to be a 30 home run guy, but slotting McCutchen right in the middle here at number 5 offers a ton of value to me for this Pirates lineup because he had only 43 plate appearances at the spot last year with a 766 OPS. He does very well with guys on base. 9 home runs, 772 OPS with men on base. Where it gets interesting for me is, let's say the Pirates are having a good first inning, scenario wise, and Kutch comes up with 2 outs and runners in scoring position, and you need a big hit from Andrew McCutchen to score those runs. Well, last year, statistically, he had a 989 OPS in those scenarios with runners in scoring position and 2 outs. That is what you want because in high leverage situations, Andrew McCutchen was very good last year. He still is very good in those situations and has continued to be very good in those situations for quite some time. And I think him being at the number 5 spot gives him 2 very good positive options for this lineup, as the 5 spot usually does for most teams. You are the anchor after the first 4 to lead into 6 through 9. So Andrew McCutchen, I think, fits that mold perfectly just because he's very good in high leverage situations. He's going to score guys that are in scoring position or on base, and he still has enough power to hit the home run ball. He could still get it out of PNC Park. He could still get it out of any ballpark. He just doesn't have the same power he used to have, but he still has enough to impact the middle of the lineup and take into the next part of the lineup, which we will get into here in just a moment with G-Man Choi, who is batting number 6, another lineup addition for the Pittsburgh Pirates that just really changed the entire landscape of how we were going to think about this lineup this year. And G-Man Choi is a very good guy to me to have at the number 6 spot, especially after the guys in the front 5. Now, I'm not saying that this lineup is really good, but it's good. Like, this is a lineup that you can trust when it is on the field primarily throughout the season. And G-Man Choi being at number 6, much like McCutchen, is going to be very important because the number 6 spot, much like the number 5 spot, leads into the guys that you kind of put in that bottom part of the lineup that are going to need guys on base to score runs. They're going to need guys to have their OPS go up. They're going to need guys to ultimately be important to scoring those runs in the 7th and 8th inning that then lead into the top of your lineup again. G-Man Choi, very good at that last year. 41 RBIs and a 937 OPS with runners in scoring position for Tampa last year. He was also very good, by the way, in the middle innings, which I considered 5 through 7. I know some people consider 4 through 6. I consider it 5 through 7 because I still think even in the 4th inning, you're kind of getting still acclimated to the starter a little bit, or the starter is struggling and then you're moving to the bullpen. I still consider that the early part of the game. But Choi last year in the 5th through 7th innings had a 650 OPS or higher in all of those innings in his plate appearances. And what was also interesting, and this is why I always recommend to use Baseball Reference, because Baseball Reference has some of the funniest stats that you will ever see, but they're very eye-opening. G-Man Choi last season had a 183 batting average with 0 outs in an inning. A lot of the times, just with the pace of a baseball game, G-Man Choi will likely not be in those scenarios very often, batting 6. Let's say 5 outs have been recorded in the first 2 innings. Well, if 5 outs in a row, he'll have 2 outs. He was much better with outs already recorded in an inning. I believe his batting average was around like a 245 with 2 outs in an inning already. But a 183 average with 0 outs, you do not want him to be in those scenarios. He batted mostly cleanup last year for Tampa Bay. It's something that I could see him doing on this team. When I was building out this lineup, though, I just felt that he was better suited to be in this spot because he wouldn't be leading off as many innings. He would have runners in scoring position more often. He would be in lower leverage situations because he was not very good in high leverage situations, which high leverage is a statistic that Baseball Reference uses. It's a very confusing one. So I would go and read it so you're understanding why I'm saying this. But basically, high leverage situations are kind of common sense. It's like, oh, there's a guy on third with 2 outs. How did he do? A lot of times G-Man Choi was not very good at it. So I could see a world where G-Man Choi is the cleanup guy, also because you probably don't want back-to-back lefties here. But also, this is just a lineup that I would say against lefties or righties is fine. But obviously, the lineup will be very different, I think, be it a righty on the mound versus a lefty on the mound. So we're going to get into 7 through 9 here shortly, but I am going to take about 5 seconds before we do that for some ads, so I will be right back. Alrighty, so hopefully you got a good word from all the sponsors of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this episode about my ideal starting lineup for the Pittsburgh Pirates in 2023. Now to the back half of the starting lineup for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and we kick it off with Jack Suwinski, who going into year 2, after a year 1 where Jack Suwinski definitely struggled. I mean, there were struggles all over the place with his strikeout numbers, with his base on balls numbers. Of course, I already talked about it in my 2023 preview series about him changing up his batting stance. So that's something that I'll be looking forward to see how that helps him as far as his chase rate and his strikeout rate. We'll see if that helps. But he heads into year 2 with a lot of pressure because the Pittsburgh Pirates, as I've mentioned before, have a lot of outfielders that they need to get looks on, like Travis Swaggerty, Connor Joe, who's a much more known commodity, Cal Mitchell, Caden Smith and Jigba. There's Tucupita Marcano, G1 Bay. There's a lot of different guys that the Pirates have at their disposal at the outfield positions. So Jack Suwinski is going to have to improve this year, and he batted 7th a lot last year. Had a 654 OPS, batting 7th in last season. He did struggle with runners in scoring position in terms of his average and his OPS and his on base percentage, but his power did make up for it. He had 11 home runs last year at the number 7 spot. And of course, the lefty power will be useful with good hitters ahead of him. I mean, you have a guy like G-Man Choi who's going to find ways to get on base a lot of times. Andrew McCutchen is going to find ways to get on base a lot of times as well. So hopefully that helps Jack Suwinski. And I do think he'll be better with runners in scoring position this year, and he will be better with runners on base just because also a lot like Oneil Cruz, if he gets the bat on the ball, it's going to go to the outfield more likely than not, and you always want something like that when it comes to getting runners in scoring position or getting runners to score from third. It's very, very, very important for guys like Jack Suwinski to be in those scenarios to only get better. But if his performance is not that good this year, this lineup could change drastically because then you're talking about having G1 Bay as a potential leadoff guy. You're talking about having Connor Joe slot into this 7 spot, which changes up things. You're talking about a lot of different things. But also, if Suwinski was to come out of the lineup, that's where I think this gentleman, Rodolfo Castro, would move up to number 7. But for now, because I expect Suwinski to be the starting left fielder or even center fielder. We've seen the Pirates flirting with it in practice and in a game yesterday or Saturday, I believe. Rodolfo Castro could slide up into that 7 spot, but he is at number 8. And I did mention it here in the graphic that he did drop in the lineup due to lineup additions from this past offseason. And last year he was up there and he performed well. He performed well at the 3 spot. He performed well at the 5 spot. He was even at the 2 spot and the 4 spot at times. But now that the lineup looks much better on paper and will probably be much better by proxy of additions like Carlos Santana and G-Man Choi and Andrew McCutchen, you're looking at the idea of Rodolfo Castro being a very valuable 8 hitter. Now, there's also a world where I could see Rodolfo Castro being at number 9 in a lineup with Hedges batting 8th, just because we know Austin Hedges wasn't brought in for his bat. But Rodolfo Castro, as you see here, had his best success come at the 5th and 7th spot last year, posting a 794 and a 715 OPS respectively. He also does very well with runners in scoring position with an 897 OPS, but he did struggle in those high leverage spots with a 182 average. That's why I also moved him down in the lineup, because lower in the lineup, he's going to have less high leverage situations to worry about. So I think he could be a ton more comfortable. I think he's going to be a lot better when guys in front of him get on base. I think it's something that he will do well with. And him being at number 8 in my ideal lineup just really speaks to how well the Pirates constructed this lineup in the offseason with the additions of Santana, Choi, and McCutchen. Because when you have a guy like Rodolfo Castro, who's now batting 8th for you as a switch hitting power bat in the lineup, that is a very valuable piece to have. And again, I could see him moving up to 7. It's something that I could very well see if Suwinski comes out of the lineup or if Suwinski struggles. I could also see him go down to 9 to then set up guys like Ke'Bryan Hayes and Bryan Reynolds to score them. And that's something that a lot of teams also do as well, is they'll put decent guys down there at the number 9 spot to set up their top of the lineup. Could that be Castro? Sure. But I don't know if Austin Hedges being in this lineup, which we already know is going to be a thing, really allows for that, because I don't want Hedges batting 8th and hurting the likes of Jack Suwinski and others from scoring. But we already know Austin Hedges wasn't here for his bat. Austin Hedges is here to improve the pitching staff and help the young pitchers and be a very good defender. As I mentioned here in this graphic, not really brought in for his bat at all. He never batted higher than 8th for Cleveland in 2022. But again, I could see a world where he does move up to 8th in the lineup just so he's not 9th and not setting up the guys at the top of the lineup. And again, with his defense being more important, I slotted him in at 9. And there's not much else to say about Austin Hedges' bat. We already know what kind of bat he has. We already know where he is in that offensive department, but he was not here for that, which I also joke and say he's going to hit a home run on opening day against the Cincinnati Reds, because everybody's been saying this. So we're going to take a look again at the lineup construction in full. Again, Ke'Bryan Hayes at 1, Bryan Reynolds at 2, Oneil Cruz at 3, Carlos Santana at 4, Andrew McCutchen at 5, G-Man Choi at 6, Jack Suwinski at 7, Rodolfo Castro at 8, and Austin Hedges at 9. Guys, I want to hear your thoughts on what your ideal starting lineups would be for the Pittsburgh Pirates, who you would have batting leadoff, who you would have batting cleanup. I want to know if you agree or disagree with my ideal lineup that I would put out there for the 2023 Pittsburgh Pirates. But guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Locked On Pirates. Again, I am, of course, your host, Ethan Smith, the host of the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. You can follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news and analysis on the Pittsburgh Pirates throughout the 2023 season. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Give good ratings on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Have a wonderful Wednesday, March 1st, and thank you so much. And I will see you guys tomorrow with Craig on Craig Thursday.